right, I believe we are live now. All right, hello and welcome to Love Jones, Relationships in the Black Community. I am Erica Street, a Black mental wealth, a Black mental wellness mentee who will be supporting this session today. I have the pleasure of introducing you to our amazing speakers who include Romal Tune, who is our moderator for today, and our panelists, Dr. Candice Nicole, and Keith Mascoll. Mr. Tune, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Erica, for the introduction. And hello and welcome, everyone. We have what I think is a very exciting conversation ahead of us, especially as someone who is recently married. This is my wife and I's first year of marriage in the midst of a pandemic. In full disclosure, this is her first marriage. It is not my first. My two children are from a previous marriage. My daughter, graduate of Hampton University, and my son is currently at Morehouse. I am an excited Howard alum, as all y'all can imagine. But to get into the conversation, we will have a few people joining us for this conversation, specifically around the topic of relationships in the Black community, moving from surviving to thriving. So Candice is with us. She is a professional psychologist. Is that correct, Candice?
Mm-hmm.
And Keith, I believe your wife will be joining us? Keith, can you hear me? I think he might be working that out. So Candice, I'm going to pitch the first question to you, specifically on the topic. I want to think about it through the lens of being in this pandemic, and we talk about love and relationships and how we treat our partners. Have you, in your experience, noticing anything around things that have changed in relationships in terms of how people are transitioning to make sure they're healthy? And I guess the second part to that is any recommendations for how to create healthy space in the midst of a pandemic when you're not used to your normal routine?
Yeah, I'll just jump right in and say that most people are spending more time with their partners than they have in recent years, just because many people are working from home. And so when you work from home, you realize that the amount of time you spent at work away could either have been a blessing or a curse for your relationship, for your marriage. And so many people are having to think through what new boundaries should be. Like, okay, if I'm in my workspace, then that means that we're not doing date time also, or what type of alone time they need to recover so that they feel refreshed enough to be with their partner and enjoy each other. Having to rethink what dates look like, rethink when you have time for sex if your kids are working from home too, or doing school from home. And so all of these things have had to be renegotiated, which is important because it really gives you a chance to have a fresh take on your relationship. And so I've been hearing that from some of the clients that I've worked with, and it's been really exciting, but, stressful for some.
Yeah, in that same regard, I found too that I use flowers.com a lot more than I ever have. And it's a great tool for decreasing tension. It's kind of like there is the adjustment of being home consistently and not having to travel and things of that sort. But gifts, I find, work, surprise gifts. But I'm also wondering, I guess my question is around when there is tension, right? Because I feel like the pandemic has accelerated the growth of relationships. Like I mentioned, we got married a year ago, but I feel like I'm counting in dog years now. Mm-hmm. The pandemic, it's 7. Because it has accelerated interaction, and it has almost given us a sense of, like, I guess this is what retirement would look like, and who we are when we're not busy, and we can't create distractions with busyness of work and other things. But what are some tools that you've recommended so that people are thriving in the midst of this, tools that help them to, I guess, better communicate and deal with overcome the challenges of the stress this environment has created? Because it's not just a pandemic, it's racial tensions in the country, and up until today, not knowing what to expect politically.
Mm-hmm. So I'd say first, you want to ask for what you want from your partner. Don't assume that they will know or that they should know. Be really explicit in a gracious way, of course. No ultimatums or anything like that, but saying, hey, honey, I need an hour to myself, so I'm going to go for a walk or go for a drive. Or, I would really benefit from a massage after the end of this day because it has been stressful at work and people have gotten on my nerves. So asking for the things that you want from your partner is going to be number one. Both partners, or however many partners are in your relationship dynamic, should get into the practice of, if you already have it, asking for what you want. I'd say 2, being really open to communicating when you are stressed out. And so stress might look different in all of us. For example, I'm an internalizer, so most people wouldn't know when I'm stressed unless they know me very well. And so I have to communicate. I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed with all of the responsibilities that are on my plate right now. And that way my partner knows, my husband knows, all right, well, she's feeling stressed out. What can I do for her to make her day better? Doing those things with and for your partner by communicating, I think, are 2 strategies that can be used for sure. And we've got some of our folks joining us.
Yeah. And that's very helpful. I think communication I found as a key. But what I have learned about myself in relationships and connecting that to how I grew up is that I didn't learn good communication skills. I learned how to do conflict well. And communication was always about winning rather than about an equal exchange or sometimes a give and take. So I guess, and I don't know if our others who are part of the session can hear me. If y'all can hear me, can I get a yes or an amen or something? Keith or Tariiq? Tariiq, can you hear me? You have no sound. Okay, you can hear me, but we can't hear you, Tariiq, and nor can we hear you either, Keith. So, Candice, while we work that out, I'm going to, I guess I still want to ask you this question around how our upbringing and our family environments, the impact they have on our communication skills and as well as our views of intimacy and sexuality. Because for a long time, intimacy to me just meant sex.
Yeah.
And I got a feeling that wasn't what that was supposed to mean. And I didn't figure that out until a whole lot later. So how does upbringing and family environment impact how we communicate and how we live into intimacy and even our own sexuality?
So attachment style is influenced by your family environment. And one of my favorite books for attachment style, which is for couples, and it's really easy to read. It's not really theoretical and philosophical. It's straight up language. It's called Wired for Love. And it gives you these frameworks on this attachment style is anxious. This attachment style is avoidant. This attachment style is secure. Those are the 3 main ones, but it gives different language for it. And so when you have an anxious attachment style, maybe you had a family system where you didn't know if your needs were going to be met. So you found ways to get your needs met by being needier or creating or reaching for or always pulling for those needs to be met. Whereas if you have an avoidant attachment style, you may not have been able to get your needs met at home. And so you figured out a way to be self-sufficient, probably to a fault. And so you kind of push people away when they try to get from you, or you set really rigid boundaries as opposed to flexible boundaries. And typically, interestingly enough, those are the people who end up together. So you'll find a person who is anxious and they're chasing after the person who's avoidant, and you're just going in circles. But secure people have a nice ebb and flow where they can be vulnerable, be intimate with folks, and also have firm enough boundaries where they're not totally enmeshed and they have their own sense of self. And so it shows you what those different attachment styles mean, how they came to be when you were younger, and then how they show up in relationships. Another thing that impacts it is birth order. So I don't know about y'all, but those of you who are the oldest, those of you who are the middle, those of you who are the youngest, those of you who are onlys, each of those birth orders by our research suggests that they kind of give you a way to interact in your family system that often replicates itself in your relationship. So if you're the oldest, then typically you might have been over responsible or had caregiving responsibilities for your family members that were younger than you. If you're in the middle, you're probably the person who makes the peace and you're the mediator and make sure everybody feels okay. If you're the youngest, you're probably the levity of the family or the one who has always gotten the attention. And so you're used to that. And all of these different dynamics in birth order and attachment kind of show up in the way we relate to each other. And it also shows up in the way we use sex. And so sex can be a vehicle of pleasure, of connection, of intimacy, but it also can be a compulsion. It also can be a way to get your physical needs met and distance yourself from your body in connection with other people. So when you're healthy and you're well, the way you engage sexually with a partner, even if it's someone that you may not want to be with forever, is also healthy because you take care of yourself and the other person. There's give and take. It's not something where you expect a person to be your source of pleasure and not provide them any pleasure. So the sex piece is really important because it can be some of the best and most fun glue in a relationship, or it can be the thing that really takes you out.
Well, I guess, and that still goes in line with the question around intimacy and sexuality, right? So one, where can we find tools to, because I would imagine some of us need to unlearn and then learn new ways of being, communicating, and even showing up in a relationship. You mentioned the book, Wired for Love. Mm-hmm. Does that book provide any tools and kind of like practices to live into?
It does. Wired for Love is a good one. Also, there's a great one. It's, the author of Love Languages. I like Love Languages a lot, but this author also has apology languages. And I think that's even more important for communication because there are different apology styles, and maybe you and your partner aren't congruent on what it means to receive an apology or give an apology. And so it gives you a framework for how to practice apologies in a way that aligns with what your partner's apology preference is. And that is, for me, even more important than the love languages, because we know relationships will have ruptures. And so you have to recover through the way you apologize and come back together.
Yeah, I found that I've had to surprise my wife with apology, because if I apologize in the moment, then it was a coerced apology or I'm just saying it to get beyond it. So if I wait and I come back later with an I'm sorry out of nowhere, then it's received because it was intentional. It wasn't expected. That's one that I've learned, around this, sticking to the same aspect of it in the line of questions we have. For men, a lot of our identity around our maleness is also shaped by our environments and our families. For some of us, our dads, if our dads were present, mine was not for much of my life, but also by society. What impact does our society have on our ideas of what it means to thrive in relationship? And then a separate question is how society influences our ideas of what it means to show up as a man in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. I think Keith, can you hear? I saw your thing bounce. Can you speak?
Keith, can you, we can hear you. Can you say something so we know that you can hear us? Okay. We'll keep so my question was around dealing with, in order to thrive in a relationship, I think as a man, I have to show up really dealing with my understanding of what it means to be a man, one, and how that has shaped my idea of intimacy and how I show up and offer intimacy, and even, I guess, how I receive it. So how has society shaped some of our understandings of what it means to be a man in relationship and to thrive in a relationship in ways that have been unhealthy for us that we need to unlearn?
I think it depends on how much you endorse what society says. So society has some pretty strict scripts for men. Be stoic, be unemotional unless it's anger, be the provider, be the protector, And if you don't have the capacity to do those because of whatever social conditions you were raised in, you're inadequate, you're not worthy, you're not valuable. And so all of these aspects of like how we really constrict who men can be, don't be affectionate, because if you're too affectionate, that's not manly. All of these ideas are just things that have been used to really foreclose on men's ability to get and give the type of love that they want to give and get. So I think that it really depends on your willingness to risk it, because manhood is a culture just like womanhood is a culture. And there are some benefits to that privilege that some men really want and value. And so they'll abide by all of these rules. But you can also make different choices and be as flexible in your expression of masculinity or manhood as you would like to be. So it depends on the man, because there's so many masculinities. And even if you think about, you shared earlier that you travel to all of these cultures, you can see the different presentations of masculinities among different cultures, right? And it's like we have a really prescribed script here, but you have access to any number of masculinities. So I think that if you make those decisions because you're informed about the options out there, then you're probably more confident to be able to express manhood and masculinity in the way that works for you and really get your needs met, and then allows your partner to get their needs met too.
Yeah, that willingness to risk it really hit home for me, because I think that's what has been required at given time in order for a relationship to move from surviving to thriving. I had to risk some of my ideas of what my manhood was defined by. Because I grew up in an environment, I'm from the Bay Area, home of Too Short. So I can tell you right now, it was pretty toxic, my ideas of maleness and intimacy and personal identity and relationship. And so things like communication, apologizing, talking about how I feel, were always deemed as signs of weakness and signs of vulnerability. And vulnerability, the way I grew up, was a sign of weakness. In fact, communicating was a sign of weakness. You can't talk too much, right? So silence was strength, and silence kept you guarded. But I think in relationship, none of that served me well. And I found myself defining my relationship by street codes that my wife didn't grow up with. And nor did she know that she was being defined by a code that she was unaware of. And being judged by a code, right, of loyalty and of silence. And, we just get through things without talking about them. That's how we did things on the street. And so unlearning those things and learning new skills, I had to risk my whole definition of maleness.
And what did it cost you to risk it? What did you feel was at stake when you risked it?
It only cost me my own sense of self.
Okay.
And it was worth the price. And what I mean by that is I now have the freedom to define who I am for myself, rather than defining who I am based on ideas that my uncles and my family gave me that absolutely weren't serving me well, and definitely weren't serving them well either. I think that's a problem for many of us in relationships. We live into these inherited narratives that we've accepted as true from our parents and from our uncles and aunts and others that didn't serve them well, but we accept it as true. And now we live into them and they don't even serve us well, right? So, and I think in some ways, like my mom and my aunts perpetuated some of the unhealthy male stereotypes that women don't like in relationships. So it was don't cry, be strong, get up, be a man, all of these things where I couldn't feel too much because feeling was weakness. I couldn't cry because crying, boys don't cry, right? If I ever talked about being afraid or nervous or scared, I was weak. But then I get in a relationship with a woman, she's like, so tell me how you feel. I'm like, no woman in my life has ever given me permission to feel. People who nurtured me didn't give me permission. They said, get up, stop crying, be strong. And now you're asking me to tell you about my feelings.
Yes.
I mean,
you're preaching right now, because so many people come in and they're like, okay, I thought I was doing it right. I thought I was doing manhood right. The way that I was taught to do, the way that it was reinforced constantly. Don't talk, don't say it like this, don't cry, all of these pieces. And then you find that has a whole wall up between you and the person you want to love. All of those suppression of emotion and all of that, it puts a big wall up.
And I found in affection, I wonder if you experience this with your clients. Again, these are things I believe are important when we talk about moving from surviving to thriving, because I think a lot of us have been holding our breath, and metaphorically, in relationships, not giving ourselves permission to breathe, or in essence be free, and surrender some of these ways of being that don't serve us well. For me, one of those was hugging. And affection, right? Yeah. And I started researching hugging, and I tell people this, I think, what do you guys say? It takes a hug should, last for what, 15, 20 seconds?
I don't know. I heard 6, but 15, 20 sounds good to me.
If I get to 6, it's still cuddling in my definition. So I had to deal with the fact that no one held me like that. Not the way I grew up, being hugged and being held, and understanding that beyond sexual touch to just the touch of love and affection was something that was lost in much of my childhood, teen years, and even young adult years. So now being in relationship and trying to be healthy and understanding the value and need for a hug that has nothing to do with sex or a gateway to sex, and just because you're wanting to let someone feel that they're worthy, is a new skill. Do you ever experience that with clients, and how do you help them through it?
I do. Some of it is based on what you talked about. So not having that modeled in the home, people feeling like you have to toughen kids up by not showing them affection, which we know, according to our research, just doesn't work. It makes people like either go cold or thirst for that affection in other ways. But some of it is about body image too. So people don't feel like they're desirable or should be touched. They don't like the way they look. They don't like the way they feel in their bodies. And so they don't want people to touch them because it reinforces for them like this feeling of disgust. And so I think about it with clients around looking at yourself in the nude in the mirror and appreciating your body, or asking your partner to touch you and hold your hand for 5 minutes and just practicing it and seeing what feelings come up for you as you experience that. And gently easing into it. If you haven't been touched and you haven't had an affectionate lifestyle, maybe you'll never be a person who is overly affectionate or completely affectionate, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you as you are, but it's something that you at least want to practice and see if maybe it was going to meet a need for you that you had the whole time and you just didn't know. So I always talk about all of this as practice. There's certain things that you can practice and see how they feel in your relationship. Give it a month or two of touching and holding each other, and that being it, and not having an outcome, like you said, of sex has to come.
For a whole month of that I wanted to.
Yeah,
that ain't gonna work.
Try it out for a month and see, like, if you just, not to hold out from sex, but just trying out, just touching each other in other ways and having the sex that you would like to have in between all of that, but just touching each other, holding each other. Yeah,
understood. Make sure you create space for just intimacy without sex being in the picture. There's a question here. A Skip asks, can the opposite also be true? Can being too open or sharing too much personal trauma with a partner be unhealthy? I want you to speak to that, but I wanted to share from my personal story about that. Skip, I would say no. And there was perhaps a time in my life where I would have said yes. Sharing too much and being too open with your partner is dangerous, because so if you're talking to a person that you cannot trust with your truth, because if you're sharing too much with a person you can't trust with your truth, what you will inevitably experience is that they will weaponize your story against you. And so you want to make sure that it's someone you can trust who will not weaponize your truth. The other part of that is, I believe it's important to I grew up in an environment where loyalty was just as important as the air I breathed. And loyalty was reassessed every day. It wasn't just assumed. It was a daily encounter and interaction that would determine if you were worthy of loyalty or capable of being loyal to me day by day. Now, in order to have that kind of loyalty and love, it requires open, honest transparency. And it's not ever too much when you're sharing even your personal trauma. The key for me with that is, what I had to learn several years ago was that when I was open and honest sharing my trauma, I realized that I was sharing the trauma, not the healing. And so what I've learned is that sometimes you can see a person as being very vulnerable because they're telling you their trauma. But if that story doesn't end with healing, they're still telling you they're still wounded. And so you're not there to heal that wound for them. But if anything, you can walk alongside them on their own journey of healing, because you didn't create the wound, but you can encourage them in the pursuit of healing it and offer tools and be a strong presence for someone as they heal their trauma. So I don't think it's ever too much to share too much of your trauma with someone. It gives them a lens into where your wounds are. And those wounds are actually the places where you need love to show up. Right. We love to tell people about all the good things about ourselves, but where our wounds are and where our pain resides, that's where we're really telling them, love me in this place where I've been hurting and where something has been missing. And if you don't give that to them, when they miss the mark, they won't know it because you never told them that that was a place where you needed to be loved. So you can expose the wound to them if you trust and they have shown you that they're willing to love you in that wounded place in order for you to heal. And if you really want loyalty from a person and you want to show that you can be loyal to them, it requires being courageous enough to share those parts of your truth that some may deem shameful in order for you to overcome it. And that person can then love you in the ways that you need to be loved. Dr. Candice?
Listen, I hear you wholeheartedly. I just want to add one additional piece, that some of that you need to share with your therapist and unpack too, because your partner is not a trained mental health professional and they can only do the parts that you discussed with, like, just being alongside you, but maybe they don't have the capacity to help you heal or to help you process, but they still want to be in the game with you. They want to be the person you come home to after you've had your therapy session and kind of flushed out some of those pieces, and you get to practice those new strategies with. And so have a community of people you heal with. If you over rely on your partner and they're the only person that you have for that, then you wear out the opportunity to talk about that balance, joy, love, fun, vision setting, goal oriented, good pieces with the parts that really do need to be discussed with your partner. So I absolutely agree that you want to talk about things that are painful with your partner, talk about some traumas, give them the in to you, but also do it with somebody who has the skills to help you heal. Because most partners don't come into the world ready to help you heal. They don't know how.
Yeah, no, everybody's showing up with their stuff, right? I've learned things from my partner. You know, her family. One of the things I value most about her family is every Sunday is family dinner, right? And they don't cuss, they ain't no arguing. You know, it's normal, it's healthy. I did not grow up with that. I grew up in the anticipation of some cussing and some fighting. And so it's actually being a part of her family. It's almost as if God has given me something that I've always deserved.
Yes.
But in that same vein, how has Western or American culture prevented us as Black people and descendants of the continent, kept us from thriving in relationship? What are things that society has convinced us are healthy for relationships that actually have not served us well? And how do we overcome them?
Yeah, I have a few things. One, that we don't need each other and that we're not valuable. So society has been really insidious about devaluing Black lives in a way that we have internalized in a lot of ways. And so when you see each other, when you see a Black man or a Black woman or a Black trans person, and they are imperfect like they are because they are a human, you automatically make the assumption that something is inherently bad about them. They're irredeemable because society has kept these stereotypes on Black people. So maybe a person is depressed or exhausted and you think they're lazy. So I think about all these tropes about, like, men sitting on the couch playing video games, eating up all somebody's food and stuff. And they're like, oh, that man is just lazy and he ain't nothing. And it's like, he could also be depressed though. Like there are other ways that we can compassionately see each other that we sometimes haven't given each other the best grace and compassion that we have. We spend it all out in the world at work, giving people all kinds of margin of error and grace and compassion. And then we get home and expect perfection out of our partners. And I think that's irresponsible. So I think the practice of trying on grace and compassion with the people you love most, Black people in particular, giving ourselves that margin of error, the space to be imperfect, is how we start to dismantle some of that. And I'd also say that some of us, and this might be the case for you, I've seen it a lot in Black women in particular, especially professional Black women, is that we have been overly responsible. And so we don't even give people room to be full, to show up, to have our back. We think that to control the situation, we have to take responsibility for all parts of it. And so you just take people's autonomy away through that. And so being able to love someone without possessing them and controlling them, I think those are other pieces that I see how society and standards of like white culture norms kind of make you love in ways that really aren't love.
Yeah, and I found that, I traveled to the continent a lot, especially West Africa. And the rampant individualism that you point out and in the US and in Western culture in general, I think has been for me at times, certainly a challenge to thriving in relationship, because I viewed a healthy relationship, a thriving relationship, through the lens of capitalism and economics and what we had together. People talk about the power couple and what we can build, right? And so you can have a lot of stuff and still not truly have each other. And then you reach a point where, okay, we have everything we've wanted. We have the money and the stuff. Now, who are we when we're not chasing something? Right. And who are we going to be together for the rest of our lives when there's nothing else to pursue and the persona no longer matters? We've been replaced by a younger generation who could care less about our accomplishments. Right. And so in visiting the continent, that kind of individualism in different parts of the world just doesn't happen because no one is ever told, go off and find your own way. You're an adult now. You're on your own. That's just not. As some would tell me, not even an African value anywhere on the continent. No one would ever tell you you're on your own and go find your own way. And so I think learning new ways of being and what healthy looks like, hey, y'all, and what healthy looks like, and not defining it by the attainment of something or the pursuit of something, but thriving, I found is really more about how you feel.
Serious technical issues, and we can't hear anything. Can you hear us?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. And I can hear Nicole talking to you.
We just don't know if we can be heard.
We can hear you.
Yes, you can. Hey, Tariiq, can you hear us, Tariiq? Tariiq? But we can't hear you. Okay, so Candice, as I was saying, relearning what healthy looks like through a different cultural lens can be helpful in relationship. Would you agree?
Yes. You know what I learned? And this blessed me. So I have some colleagues and some friends who are from the continent. And I see, hey, shout out to Dr. Fluid. I see you out there. But I have a number of people who are from the continent, different countries in Africa. And what I found out, which I didn't know, is that there are helpers. You have helpers in your home. You have people who help you with things. It's not just mom and dad and child like it is in the family unit here. And so I was like, wait, you have people help you clean, and you have people help you cook, and people help you. Mothers get that type of help when they first have a child. And I was just like, that's what I'm talking about. And I feel like in very many ways, I was raised like that. So I grew up in the subsidized housing projects of a small town, Lockport, New York. And we had a community. My grandmothers were not too far away. My aunts were not too far away. And that, because we were in an economic position where we really had to rely on each other, we relied on each other and it was useful. And I feel like it was part of the reason why I came out like a good human being. Now with my son, we're here in Lexington, Kentucky, and it's my husband, me, and him. And we don't have family all around. And so we're kind of making it work on our own. And I don't think this is a sustainable model, to be frank. Like, I think this US centric model is not a sustainable model for family. I believe in a multi-generational community and family household.
Yeah, I think that my first marriage suffered because of the paper chase. I was so driven by my ideas of success, financially and socially, my ideas of how I wanted to be perceived in the world rather than who I really was in the world. I was more about creating a perception rather than living into a reality. And what I find is that in order to thrive, thriving requires releasing the idea of chasing something. And as my therapist told me once, your dream wants you just as much as you want your dream. If you don't have to chase it, you just have to live into it, right? And the only reason you don't have it yet is because you think it's somewhere out there waiting on you. And what's really waiting on you is for you to believe that you are already worthy. Yep. And your assumption is that you believe one day you will be worthy. But if you accepted that you're worthy right now, you'd stop chasing things. Yes. Because you'd already feel deserving. And instead of chasing, you will start anticipating, right? And so because you know you're deserving, you don't have to chase it. And chasing is negative energy anyway. It already sounds like something is elusive and trying to get away from you. But if you abide into you can attract, you can anticipate, right? And you can live like it's coming rather than chasing and hustling and grinding. That's negative energy language, right? Abiding and anticipation and living into, that's the expectation. And I think as we look at shifting how we think about success through a Western lens, which constantly pushes on us a chase, a hustle, and a grind, which is negative, creates inertia in and of itself, to believing that we're worthy enough that we don't have to chase. We just have to stay focused and set our intentions and live and work in alignment with those intentions, creates a culture shift in a sense as well, and then pulls us away from rampant individualism, because chasing and hustling assumes that there's not enough for everybody, and then pushes you into scarcity. And now we're back into rampant individualism. And therefore we end up we can't trust people outside of our relationships. And then we think that we can turn that off when we show up at home, when we have this glimmer in our subconscious that we can't even trust our partner when it comes to the hustle and the grind. Yeah. And so they're left out of what's happening in our professional lives. And when we ask, how was your day? It's like, oh, it was just a good day. And they're talked to the same way you talk to somebody you don't even live with, right? So redefining how we show up at home through a lens of what we really expect when it comes to success, and that our partner is a part of that journey with us, and should be a part of that conversation as we live in anticipation together, not chase anything together. Because chasing is going to pull us apart. We might be chasing different things. But if we live into anticipation together and work together, it brings us back into community. So,
I'm hearing some feedback.
Myself all over. I think if you can mute your video, because I think your video is catching up. Yeah, Keith, Tariiq, can you say something? Maybe we can hear you now. Your video, Keith, you got it. Yeah, there you go, Keith. You. Tariiq, I see you twice now. Say something. We can hear you. Yeah. Right, so on one of those, I don't know what's going. Okay, so let's go with the cell phone. Keith, question. You've been listening for quite a while. Is there anything that stuck out for you that you would like to respond to? Keith?
thought it
Oh,
was working.
it was so. Yeah. Hey, Keith, I think you should turn off the device that's not working and just work with the phone.
I can barely hear. We can barely hear anything at all. So I apologize, brother, sisters.
It's not
Somehow, like it's real, like it's incredible that it's real. It's real faint.
Okay.
So
yeah, you're on a
you have
delay.
to probably see my ear for me to try to figure this out.
Yeah, because we can hear you fine, but we know that you're on a delay. And Tariiq, I think you're frozen. Are you frozen or just sitting really still?
I can't hear you guys.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
All right, Candice, I'm gonna keep rocking with it. We have a few more questions. We want to take some Q&A as well. In fact, I'll make this my last question. And if folks are there who can hear me, who are participating, please type your questions into the chat and I can share them as well with Candice. So my next question is around couples and therapy, right? So I have my own therapist. My wife has her therapist. We had therapists before we knew each other. So that was good. I always tell her that were I not in therapy, there was no way we could be in a relationship today. And she agreed. She's like, the work she was doing on herself allowed her to show up too, right? And so it's the work we were doing on ourselves. And I wasn't doing my work to prepare myself for a relationship. I was doing my work to become a better me, right? And I think I could say the same is true for her. What does it look like in your experience? Do you feel like there are stigmas amongst Black men and women in relationship around going to therapy? I have some friends who do couples counseling, some brothers who do it with their wives, and I have some friends, who feel like they don't need it, ain't nothing wrong with them, although there is. They feel like it is not at the level of therapy, as if it has to be super bad in order for you to need a therapist. And I kind of treat therapy like a physical. That's right. I don't wait until I'm sick to go to the doctor. I make sure I stay well and get the tools in order to stay healthy. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that therapy is valuable and useful for everyone, but it does really matter who your therapist is. And maybe you have to search around for the right one. I really appreciate the point you made earlier about going to therapy for you to do your own self-exploration and your own healing. And I think that's valuable for people when they're in that season of their life where they're single, for sure. But even when you're in a relationship or marriage, you can still have therapy for yourself. I do think that there is somewhat of a stigma still, but it's decreasing with conferences like this and plenty of mental health professionals on social media sharing information, normalizing it, and more of us getting into the profession and letting you know we're out here and we want to see you. So I think couples therapy is dope. I love it. I enjoy doing it. And I also love the benefits of seeing people who have a relationship issue that's a normal issue. It's not like something is wrong with them inherently. I actually don't even think anything is wrong with most people inherently. I think that you might have some new things you need to practice. And so you get into a couples therapy situation, your therapist gives you some opportunities to practice new ways of being, and you can try them on, see what works for you, and say, yes, we're going to take this with us when we're done with therapy. And no, we are not going to take this one with us when we're done with therapy, and make that choice for yourself as autonomous humans. But I love it. And I love to see Black people coming into therapy. I have seen an uptick in my clients in droves this year, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. As you were talking, something that resonated with me was when you said around brokenness, right? I tend to believe, we use this idea, people talk about being broken all the time. And I used to define myself as broken because of the trauma of my childhood, right? And what I realized is that from birth, we're born into a broken society. So maybe life isn't so much about being broken, but it's a journey of picking up the pieces and becoming more and more whole along the way. And so it's not about fixing, you're broken and need to be fixed. It's like, no, you're on a journey if you do the work of becoming more and more whole, right? And that is a lifelong journey and commitment that requires a lot of work.
Yes.
So I don't know if folks have any questions. We have a few more minutes. We would love to take your questions. I'm putting a shameless plug into the chat. It is the title of my book because I didn't put it in the store where Nicole told me to before the conference. It's called Love is an Inside Job. But if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I'm going to see if I can. Trying to get
see
to
a
the
few
chat
in
now.
there.
Okay, maybe you could pick one that you want to respond to.
Would you recommend therapy for dating couples as well? Yep. Sure.
Yes.
If you're serious, there you go, Tariiq. Go ahead. I heard you say yes.
Just so you know, if I keep looking up, it's because I have you on one screen, but I'm looking at my phone too. My phone doesn't have your faces. I'm all over the place. But if the question is if we recommend therapy for people who are married, most definitely. I do a lot of premarital work and definitely sit down with people who are in relationships and may not even know if they want to continue. But in order to actually get prepared for marriage, I think you definitely want to sit down, make sure you're connecting, you're on the same page with things. I talk to singles all the time and kind of tell them, look, before you actually plan that trip down the aisle, make sure that you're very self-aware. Make sure that you are in a place where you can open up and be ready to do the work necessary to be in a healthy relationship, because that work is the thing that you scares people away. And just be prepared for being very intentional in the work that you have to do. If you're just going to do the things that you're comfortable with doing, it doesn't really demonstrate care. But it's that work that you're doing, is the intentionality that really shows that I want to be with you, and this is what I think we can actually do together. Did you get all that?
Yes.
Okay. That's good. That's good. Thank you, Tariiq. Hey, Keith, do you have anything you want to add? I think it's Keith and Roxann.
Sorry, did you ask a question, brother?
Yes. We're at our last 5 minutes. I know you guys were able to hear some of the conversation. As we take questions, are there anything that you would like to add to the conversation while we're also fielding questions?
Yes, I think the importance of self-care first in a relationship is just incredibly important, and something that Roxann and I talk about on the podcast, and something that we realized that we are better in our relationship once we both were in therapy, and making that commitment to our relationship, but to ourselves, definitely deepened our connection. And Roxann says all the time, like, you have to be able to tell the truth to yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I know that I really had to do. A survivor of sexual abuse and other trauma. And that made a huge difference. Roxann was already doing the work and leading the way in terms of that. And so I think that's pivotal, that we are taking care of ourselves first, individually, and responsible for ourselves in relationships, and then coming together to be the best that we can be. Roxann, did you want to say that? So
okay, thank you. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I didn't know if you were done.
No, I'm done. Thank you, brother.
Okay. Tariiq, do you have anything you want to add? I don't see very many questions here. Someone did ask a question around, have you heard of energy therapists? I have not, but I'm not a therapist. I'm a recipient of therapy and an advocate for counseling for sure, but that's not one I'm familiar with.
I haven't heard of an energy therapist before. I don't know if they mean like somebody who does Reiki or something like that, but No, I've never heard of an actual energy therapist. No.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. I wasn't
I
quite sure,
have.
but I want to respect. Okay, go ahead. What do you know about that, Keith? Just briefly. We got
I've
about two
heard
minutes.
and I've been, I think you're correct, brother. We talk about Reiki. Also, there is some cranial therapy and cranial sacrum therapy as well. That I've already started doing. And so it is pretty much mind, body, and spirit. And it is something to reset the nervous system. Um, and yes, and mind body attunement. And I think that's what folks are talking about. So I've begun that process myself with the help of Roxann. Did some research on that.
Yeah, I just something that Keith said a moment ago that I wanted to speak to. You were addressing it earlier, Candice, when we were talking about affection and intimacy, and he mentioned he was people who are survivors of sexual abuse. Right? I think most of the time we also that definition. Sometimes I have friends who are actual survivors of physical abuse and molestation, and I realized that my issues with affection were also tied to there were two times in my childhood that I had blocked out where I had to fight off sexual abuse. And I think I blocked them out because I knew that if I told anyone in my family that it was attempted, and I knew the other family, it would have created an all-out war in my neighborhood. People would have died. And so I put that away at the age of around 14 and never told, not even that old, I don't think I was 14, but never told anyone because of the violence that would have happened should I said anything, because it definitely would have been violent. And I realized later as an adult, when I started dealing with in therapy, why I was so adverse to affection and being touched, or especially when my male adult friends who were healthy would say things like, "I love you, man." And I'm like, man, why is he saying this to me? Like, what's that about? I couldn't even hear the words, "I love you" from another male without thinking something was wrong with that man, rather than realizing he was healthy and confident in himself. I was unhealthy and unsure of myself. So I couldn't hear love outside of a sexual intimacy with a woman, and anything outside of that, I didn't have a definition for what love looked like or sound like. And so I had to do my own healing and come up with my own definitions and understand that I was the one who needed to do the work to become healthy and confident and sure of myself and have broader definitions of intimacy, affection, and even what love sounds like. To know that it is actually okay to hear another grown-ass man say, "I love you," and it's just because he actually loves you as a human being and wants nothing from you. And it's okay to be able to affirm that in your friends, that you love and care for them too. Mm-hmm. All of that has an impact on how we show up in a relationship with a woman and whether or not we're bringing definitions of manhood that are toxic or not. Because especially if you didn't end up having a child, then it has an impact on how you're going to raise your son and your daughter. And that really shows is important how we define not only ideas of intimacy and affection, but also our willingness and ability to communicate love and the language of love in a healthy way. Keith, right. We are definitely past our time, but we started late. But go ahead, please respond to that. And I'll take some parting comments from everyone after Keith, and we will thank everyone for joining us. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I think also that
don't know what happened, Keith.
Yes, I think redefining through the process of being a survivor and whatever, redefining manhood is incredibly important, and is part of that journey, and figuring out, what that means for an individual.
We can hear you
for an
fine.
individual, and then what that means once you enter into a relationship. And so, I mean, and that's something we talk about on the podcast, and also look at the other work that we're doing which is the Triggered Project. So we're trying to examine all of these things, and also give tools on the self-care and the self-love and the process that it takes, because it is one where we question everything that's around us, and how that has an effect on our manhood, and then how that relates to a relationship.
Okay, thank you for that. And I see some resources in the comments. Tariiq and Candice, you guys have any closing comments before we go?
Go for it, Tariiq. I know I've already spent plenty of time talking.
I just want to apologize. Having these technical difficulties, had not had a chance to really get in here with you guys. I couldn't hear you for most of the session either, so I missed everything. But the parts I heard sound like it was a really good discussion. Really wish I could have been there for it. But yeah, I don't know what to close with, because I don't know what we talked about. But if you have any curiosity about who I am and what I do, you can always go to my website, insightmft.com, or you can find me on all social media platforms as Tariiq Omari, or Tariiq Omari Walton. Hopefully we can do this again so I can actually get in here with you guys. But good job.
Thank you. Candice?
I just want to shout out the fact that Black people came into this world whole and worthy, and you will leave this world whole and worthy. And so operate in your relationships out of that, not, to your point earlier, Romal, not out of scarcity or inadequacy, but of worthiness, of wholeness. And I think that's where you'll see the benefits of love.
All right. Amen. Hey, listen, thank you guys for joining us for this conversation. Candice, thank you so much. Tariiq, Keith, you guys, sorry we couldn't work out all the technical difficulties, but I think Candice and I kept rolling with it and dodging it and dodging it. We held it down. So, and again, thank you, Nicole, K-Mac, for having us. I think this was a good discussion, and God willing, it gave some people some things to think about and some tools that they can use. Until next time, peace, everybody.